All right, let's begin our study of the articles in the Formula of Concord, starting with Article 1, which deals with original sin. As you might recall, all of the articles in the formula deal with controversies among the Lutherans at the time. This controversy, the one that we're going to talk about with original sin, came about because of a pastor. His name is Matthias Flacius, or his good Latin name, he called himself Illyricus. So he attended the Wittenberg University, and he studied under Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon. He later became a professor of Hebrew at Wittenberg, graduated with his master's. He was strongly opposed to both the Augsburg Interim and Melanchthon's attempt to ameliorate it with the Leipzig Interim. And in fact, because he perceived Melanchthon's compromises as a betrayal, Flacius would refer to him as alluimus in sinu serpentem. Some good Latin there for you. Alluimus is we nourished. We get the Latin word, or the English word alumni from this. So this idea of we have nourished in our laps or in our bosom a serpent. In 1549, he moves to Magdeburg, which had become a center for Gymnasio Lutherans, the so-called real Lutherans. He moved to the University of Jena, and there he started a series of debates with a professor by the name of Victorinus Striegel. Some other moves will follow then. He gets married. He'll have 12 children. His first wife will die in 1564. He'll remarry and have 6 more with his second wife. There had been earlier heresies on original sin. The first one is Pelagianism. We kind of touched on this when we talked about the Augsburg Confession, but Pelagianism says that salvation can be accomplished by human beings apart from or with the assistance of very little divine grace. In other words, that you're able in some part to save yourself. This is named after the British monk Pelagius, who was opposed by Augustine over the need for God's grace. The other heresy is Manichaeism, which again, we got to talk about a little bit when we talked about the Augsburg Confession. But Manichaeism, it's a dualistic movement founded in Persia by a man named Mani, who was agnostic, known as the Apostle of Light and the Supreme Illuminator. Although Manichaeism was long considered a Christian heresy, it was a religion in its own right because of the coherence of its doctrines and the rigidness of its structure and institutions. So Manichaeism, it's this idea that spirituality is dualistic, that's the foundation of spiritual truth in the universe. Right? We've got the good and the evil. They're each equal and in their relative power. So what was Flacius's error in this? So in these debates he had with Striegel, they were debated in the context of Aristotelian philosophical categories and terminology of substance and accidents. And the problem is that's a false framework. It wasn't the best framework for debating original sin. So Striegel said that human nature has the accidents of sin. In other words, sin isn't really part of human nature, it's just affected by it. And in some sense, this is true, but when the use of that term accident, it ensures that original sin, it's not considered to be the very substance or the essence of human nature. But the failure is that term doesn't give it its full weight or the full justice to the depth of human depravity. Flacius said, well, human nature includes original sin as its very substance. He did this because he wanted to emphasize that human will has no power in the role of conversion. But he goes too far. He allows his words to be interpreted and understood as including sin as the part of creation of human beings, Well, this is going to be a problem because if the human nature includes original sin as part of its substance, then when Jesus assumes our nature, that must include sin. Then, as a human, Jesus would not be without sin. And then human nature can be viewed as having both good and evil as part of its substance, these two equal forces. This is why there's the charge of Manichaeism against Flacius. He didn't teach it himself, but he wasn't really accused of it per se, but his teaching left that possibility open, and that's why it was a problem. So in the end, what Article 1 is really dealing with is how much can a sinner do to bring about his own conversion? Okay, so in the epitome, remember the epitome is just going to summarize things. So it's saying, here's the argument. It's whether original sin is really, without any distinction, the corrupted nature, substance, and essence of human creature, or indeed the most important and best part of its essence as the rational soul itself at the height of its development and powers, or whether even after the fall there is a distinction between human substance, nature, essence, body, and soul, and original sin, in such a way that human nature is one thing, and original sin, which is embedded in the corrupted nature and which corrupts this nature, is another. So, and now the Lutherans set this forth. So it says, as the Lutheran says, we believe, teach, and confess there is a difference between original sin and human nature. Not only as God originally created it pure, holy, and without sin, but also now as we have it after the fall. In other words, even after the fall, this nature still is and remains a creation, a creature of God. This difference is as great as between the work of God and the work of the devil. So we're saying that the original sin, it's not part of the human nature that God created. We also believe, teach, and confess that we must preserve this difference very carefully, because the teaching that there is supposedly no difference between our corrupted and human nature and original sin, it's contrary to the chief articles of the Christian faith on creation, redemption, sanctification, the resurrection of our body. So it can't coexist with them, can it? Yeah, if we say that sin is part of our human nature, then sin is resurrected with us in heaven, and that creates some problems also. So it says, if God created not only the body and soul of Adam and Eve before the fall, but also our body and soul after the fall, even though they are corrupted, God also still recognizes them as his own works. We see this in Job chapter 10. Your hands fashioned and made me together all around. And then we see, right, they remind us that the Son of God assumed this human nature into the unity of his person, of course, without sin. And what he assumed was not another kind of flesh, but our flesh. In this way, he became our true brother. And then we quote from Hebrews 2, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared the same things. Right? He did not assume the nature of the angels, but of the descendants of Abraham. So Christ also redeemed human nature as his creation, sanctifies it as his creation, awakens it from the dead, adorns it in glorious fashion as his creation. But he did not create, assume, redeem, or sanctify original sin. He will also not bring it to life in his elect. He will neither adorn it with glory nor save it. Instead, it will be utterly destroyed in the resurrection. So again, making the point that original sin and human nature are two different things. Our human nature is corrupted by original sin, but original sin and human nature are not the same thing. We can't draw an equal sign between them. And now this gets us into these Latin terms, this substantia and accidens. So, which you can kind of see the English words in there, right? He says, concerning the Latin words substantia and accidens, since they are not biblical terms and words unfamiliar to common people, they should not be used in sermons. So in other words, This is an important part of a Lutheran understanding of what should go on in the service, that the sermon is not the place to give a lecture about theology. The sermon is the place to tell people that this is what God expects of them and how Jesus has forgiven them their sin. And I said, but at the same time, in the schools, among the learned, these terms are familiar. They can be used without any misunderstanding to differentiate the essence of a thing from that which is an accidental way adheres to the thing. So these words are properly retained in scholarly discussion of original sin. For the difference between God's work and the devil's work can be made most clear through these words, because the devil cannot create a substance but can only corrupt the substance which God has created in an accidental way with God's permission. Or the idea here really is like God's allowance. So anyway, this is also just going to take a moment just to remind you about your paper that is due April 23rd. Here are just a reminder of what's expected in the paper from the syllabus at the beginning of the semester. So just take a moment to review that. And then just looking ahead, right? So by Friday, you should that's when listening to this lecture is due. Make sure you read that section in the book of Concord. On Monday, you'll want to do the lecture for Article 2, Wednesday, Article 3. There won't be any class April 18th through 21st because April 18th is Good Friday and the 21st is Easter Monday. All right, we'll see you again.